Hello, everyone. We have Courtney Duckworth-Harris with us on today's episode of Brainrich Podcast. Courtney, welcome to the podcast. Please introduce yourself. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself and why should they listen to you and what exciting things are you planning to uncover today.
Sure. My name is Courtney Duckworth-Harris. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and I specialize in sensory integration. I work to support kids who have sensory processing disorder, along with, it comes with other concerns, autism, ADHD, but my specialty is kids with sensory processing disorder.
Got it. And you have a physical location. Where is it?
Yes, I'm the owner of Kinder Clinic. It's a kids gym in West LA, West Los Angeles, and it's really fun. There's a rock wall and trampoline and lots of swings and crash pads, and we also have an art room. It's a small space, but it's a lot of fun.
It looks fun. I saw it on your website.
Yeah.
I'm in Florida, so unfortunately, I'm not able to come and see your place, but I saw a lot of fun pictures on your website. I want to maybe go in chronological order and experience the customer journey. When people come to you, you're going through some sort of evaluation process. I'm just curious, what does that mean? What kind of assessments do you do? How do you look at the child, and what are you able to tell, and what are you looking for?
Sure. I usually get referrals. Parents will call me because they've been referred by maybe their preschool or kindergarten teacher or their another therapist, like a speech therapist or pediatrician. And the concerns tend to be regulation, social skills, along with fine motor skills like handwriting, or maybe difficulties with coordination, ball skills, strength, all of that. So parents will call me with these concerns and they'll come in, they'll schedule an assessment. I do 2 50-minute assessment sessions. And what this includes is a lot of clinical observations. So we'll just see what the kid gravitates to in the sessions. Do they want to swing, or do they want to jump? Are they safe in the gym, or are they needing more support to stay safe? And then also we'll do standardized testing. We'll use a variety, but we'll look at both their fine motor skills, so how they hold the pencil, how they can draw, how they write, and then their gross motor skills, so their strength, coordination, balance, ball skills, how they coordinate the two sides of their body for like jumping jacks and things like that. And then we'll also have the parents fill out what's called a sensory profile. And this is a questionnaire that tells us a lot about how the child reacts and experiences sensory in their world, in their daily life. So auditory, visual, tactile or touch, movement, all of this. And how are they responding? Are they overwhelmed? Are they seeking it? Are they too sensitive? And then we'll compile all this information and then write a report and then recommend treatment or other recommendations.
Got it. Speaking of assessments and things of that nature, so obviously you see a specific group of kids, but in general, I'm curious, are you observing any trends over the years? And if you do, what are those? Are kids getting better or worse? Are you observing more of one thing or the other? I'm just curious if you see anything.
Not better or worse, but I think there's a lot more information out there, a lot more knowledge. And so kids are being identified earlier. And even if they're not on the spectrum or things like that, they still might be struggling with something. Maybe they're still struggling with sensory sensitivity. So they're just overwhelmed in their preschool environments because it's too loud and too visually busy or whatever it is. So these big upsets they're having are identified as, oh, maybe this could be supported by occupational therapy. They're not just a quote unquote problem child, or they're not just being bad to be bad or lazy or whatever it is. People are more knowledgeable about ways of supporting these kids, even if they are not as impacted as like maybe kids on the spectrum or something like that. So I think that is the biggest change I've seen, so that maybe more kids coming in for sensory processing disorder and not just autism and ADHD and those bigger diagnoses.
What is the sensory processing disorder? What exactly does that mean?
Sure. I should probably explain that we're all sensory beings. Like we all know our five senses. Everybody talks about sight, taste, touch, all of that. So we all have sensory experiences every day. And we also have these two other sensory systems that nobody really talks about as much. And it's the vestibular system, which is in our inner ear. And it gives us information about our balance. And if we're dizzy, that's the sensory system impacting you when you're seasick, things like that. There's that sensory system. And then the proprioceptive system, which is in our joints and muscles. And it gives us information about where we are in space. You can close your eyes and move your arms all around and feel exactly what position your arms are in. That's your proprioceptive system telling you where you are. And then it also helps us know how hard or fast we throw a ball, how hard we're pressing with a pencil, things like that. So all of that gives us information from the external world in and vice versa. So we all are going through our days. Some people need to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym before they can sit at their desk and their computer all day. Some people need a cup of coffee or 3 cups of coffee to even get going. It's just different levels of arousal and sensory needs. We all, like on a phone call, we might fidget with a pen, chew on the pen. These are all sensory strategies that we use throughout our day just to keep ourselves regulated, our arousal level even, and just function. That's like a functional process that we all have throughout our day. Then there are some kids and people that might have what's called sensory processing disorder, where you're not necessarily getting accurate information or enough information from your sensory world through your sensory systems to your brain and back out again. You're not having functional reactions. The example of vestibular processing disorder would be those kids that are constantly moving. They're running around in circles, they're constantly spinning themselves, they're doing somersaults, they can't sit still. Preschoolers in class, they're doing laps around circle time when everybody else is just sitting there crisscross and listening. The disorder is when our sensory systems aren't giving us information, and it can be a mix of all different sensory systems. You could be sensitive to auditory but seeking vestibular or things like that. So that's the general of it.
In plain language, so if we take this specific case, right? Let's say kids are running around, cannot still. You said the brain does not get enough information. What does that mean? What kind of information? It doesn't provide enough stimuli, or it needs to be more stimulated and constant. What exactly does that?
Yeah, exactly. So if it is the vestibular system that's not communicating efficiently, then and the child's seeking more movement, that means that the child, like a typical amount of movement, like, okay, we went on the playground for half an hour, we were on the swings and we were climbing, and now my body is satiated enough, I can slow down, calm down, sit and listen to the story time or something. And a kid that's seeking might need 10 times that amount of movement to feel the same effects. Their body isn't like registering the movement as efficiently. So
Nice.
they just need more and maybe aren't getting enough in their day.
So if I understand this correctly, it's kind of like your brain has just like your stomach, right? It needs a certain amount of food to feel full and things like that. So do I understand this correctly? That the brain is also requiring a certain amount of inputs, charge, or whatever you want to call it, right? And then for some kids, it's enough to move just, like you said, for an hour. But for others, they need to run for 5 hours or whatever that is.
Right.
And in order to satiate brain with that type of input. So that's interesting, because you mentioned that there's more information out there. I'm curious, what kind of information? So what do people now become more aware of?
Well, I think there are a lot more just like accounts on Instagram that are giving parent information, parenting support and sensory processing, like accounts specifically talking about sensory processing and child development. I think there's just a lot more information at our fingertips in general. And so if you just Google, sensory processing, you're going to get tons of articles and books and, like I said, Instagram accounts and all these different things. It'll just like pop up immediately. 10, 15 years ago, there was a couple books and maybe a website or something. And so now it's more consumer friendly, I think. There.
And now I got curious. Is that a case where lack of information is a bliss, or not so much? Meaning, For instance, oh, you have an active child. Okay, so what if they run for 5 times more than the average and things like that? They will still outgrow. They will still be presumably normal adults. So why is it important to even pay attention to these things? What does that even mean if they have a disorder, if indeed it is a disorder?
Right. I mean, kids are active and it's okay. Like they should be active. They should be running around, lots of energy. They should have that burst at the end right before bedtime. They should be doing laps around the house because they don't want to go to bed. That, every kid gets the zoomies at bedtime and wake up at 5 a.m. with all the energy in the world. Kids are active and lots of energy, and that's normal. You want that. It's when it becomes dysfunctional. We all have sensory needs and all of that, but it's when it becomes disruptive and they can't get out the door or they can't follow any directions and they're struggling with friends and they're struggling to learn anything in school because they can't sit and listen. It has to compile. It's not just one little thing like, oh, you have an active kid. You should have an active kid. You want them on the playground all the time and being healthy and exercising. It's when it becomes, disruptive to school life, home life. They're having tantrums constantly, more than, depending on their age, more than typical. But it has to be a compilation of a lot of different issues for it need to be taken to an OT.
You got it. And then I always ask this question, and I'm always curious. I know that there's no perfect answer to that, but what do you think are the causes, the sources of hyperactivity, of all kinds of disorders, based on your maybe scientifically proven knowledge or maybe just an experience? Can you maybe identify those things that you might attribute to those causes that create these problems?
Yeah, it's a combination of genetics for the most part. It's not necessarily what the parents are doing. It's not nurture. In extreme cases, maybe if malnourished and neglected, all these different things, maybe, but for a healthy child that's being cared for, it's just genetics for the most part.
There's some genes that you may have, but they might not be actively expressed, right? And there's certain things that you can do to potentially mitigate the impact, even if you do have the genes that might cause certain issues.
I mean, it's how the behaviors come out and all of that, even if it is an autism and you just have some sensory seeking needs or whatever. In OT therapy, in our sessions, we do activities that remap the nervous system, remap the brain and the sensory system so that you can have more effective processing, more efficient processing of different things, movement and touch and taste and sound and all of that. For example, we'll do activities where the child is doing an obstacle course. They're seeking a lot of movements. We'll do an obstacle course in a very organized, sequential way. They're getting the nice movement that they need, the swinging and the jumping and the crashing and all of that. And they'll go in the sequence a few times and doing something that in order. That is very organizing to the brain, to the body, to remember the sequence, to follow through, the rhythmicity and the organization of all of it. If you do that over multiple sessions and usually about a year or so, we will eventually start creating anything you practice. You're going to strengthen those neuronal pathways that are helpful, and you're going to prune away the pathways that are less helpful. So those reactions in your brain where you're like, oh, I'm going to spin 10 times and I'm going to feel dizzy, and then that's going to be enough for a little while, rather than when I first come in, I'm going to spin and spin and spin and spin and spin and spin. And that you need to be stopped to check in and, oh my gosh, how do I feel? And, oh, I'm not dizzy at all. So just rebuilding those neuronal pathways of helping the brain register.
Yeah, I was going to dive deeper on that. Let's assume we are talking about the need for hyperactivity, the need for all kinds of sensory input of that style, of that kind. You give a kid more of it, or you kind of mentioned you give it in a structured way, right? So let's assume the kid wants to run, spin, and jump and all this stuff. So they come in, this is what you figured out. That's what the input of that child is. And how does your brain work? How do you design a program for them or an activity, or what's the common, what is the logic behind it?
Right. So we're going to use that sensory integration theory. So what you really want to do is sticking with the vestibular seeking kid example. Yes, they want to spin, but they don't satiate. Like they don't get dizzy. They don't feel like it's ever enough. What you do is you give them that spinning or the swinging or whatever, that tumbling movement, but then you counteract it and support the nervous system by giving them a lot of proprioceptive input, which is very calming to the nervous system. That is heavy work, like pulling and pushing and carrying heavy things and doing weight bearing activities like bear walk and climbing and things like that. And then
Mhm.
also deep pressure, which is like passive squeezes and squishing them on their pillows, tight hugs, wrapping them up in a blanket, things like that. The balance of that tells us this nervous system that, okay, so we're going to move, but then we're going to calm, and we're going to move and we're going to calm. And it just helps build those neuronal pathways.
So I see. You're saying, for instance, if you all you want to do is just run, we are going to make you do other activities, jump, squeeze, hug, and do all of those things, just so that when you do run, you will feel more satiated, right? Interesting. I'm thinking of a cooking example. Sometimes when you cook and you're hungry, you want to eat, let's assume you just make a huge bowl of eggs or something like that, but there's no salt, there's no starch, there's no other substance with it. And you're kind of eating, but at some point you sort of feeling, starting getting feel full, but it doesn't complete the profile, right? Interesting. I want to kind of understand what you have in your center. I know you have a lot of interesting tools, toys, and activities, and I'm curious, what are the purposes of it? How did you build your center, your playground? What was the logic behind? What kind of needs does it respond to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the basics. So I have a gym space. It's probably 100 square feet or so, and it's crash pads, like padded mats on the floor for safety and when we're tumbling and playing. And I have a big trampoline and a rock wall, and then like crash pads and a little like a small climbing structure, and then ropes down the center for swings. And what we'll do is we'll either do obstacle courses is a huge thing for us. We'll go from the trampoline and then we'll jump down and do some 1 foot hopping, and then we'll swing and throw a ball to hit a target, and then we'll go through the tunnel and then up the rock wall and around again. So combining a variety of sensations and movement and all of
Mhm.
that. We have so many different games and toys. It would take the rest of the day to talk about all of it, but balls and jump ropes and so many different things, building blocks and
So after you analyze people, after you do the initial assessment, do you come up with a specific routine, the specific exercises, or is it more of a, hey, let's give you a variety of things versus one?
oh yeah, it's definitely very child-centered, very specific to the kid. And what we'll do is after the assessment, we'll write goals, treatment goals. So it'll be a variety of things like, okay, they're going to be able to process, vestibular or proprioception by doing X, Y, Z. But it'll also include, they'll be able to hold their pencil with a tripod grasp and write their alphabet neatly. They'll be able to balance on 1 foot. They'll be able to do, 5 sit-ups or whatever it is, different specific goals that we want to get to help track. But then sessions are going to be different every single session. It's going to be because OT, it's a very structured, purposeful, planned out, goal-oriented work, but it looks and feels like play to the kid. It's all games and activities and art projects and all of this. So it's not like, okay, we're going to sit here and do 20 jumping jacks. It's not like adult workout. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's why we call our gyms home play gyms. So home because they're for home, but play gym, it's because we want to introduce a kid to exercises through play. We
Mhm.
want them to develop their muscles, agility, and all that stuff, but through play, because kids don't work, they play, right? So yes, I'm on the same page with you. Okay, very interesting. How often do people come to your place? And what is the portion of activities they do at your center versus the homework that they have to do?
Sure. Kids usually come once or twice a week for more intensives, sometimes 3 times a week to begin, but usually 1 to 2 is average. And we'll definitely do activities that I'll send home. Like each week, I'll send home like one skill that I want them to learn. Like, for example, okay, practice jumping jacks this week, something simple. So,
Mhm.
because families are so busy. It's really hard to squeeze in one more thing on top of everything else that they have to do. So I try to keep it simple and doable if it's like a skill that we need to build. And then if it's more of a overall like regulation, emotional regulation kind of thing, then I'll give them overall strategies that they can use. If they're starting to have a tantrum, this is what you can do. You can go choose from the list. Do you want to take a break? Do you want a tight hug? Do you want to go to your cozy corner and read a book? What do you want to do? How are we going to help you regulate? Or if it's not a tantrum, they just have a lot of energy and it's like, okay, we need to sit down for dinner, but you are still running around with a lot of energy. So what do you want to do? Do you want to do some bear walks? Do you want to do some wall push-ups? Do you want to do some frog jumps? Should I wrap you up in a blanket like a burrito? What's going to make you feel calmer so we can have dinner or do homework or whatever it is?
And you literally ask kids for that, or or is it a combination of ask and you do it and see how much impact does it create?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely a variety. What I'll do is like in sessions, I'll work with the kid we'll try a bunch of different strategies, like what feels good. Do you like to be squished or do you really like to do the work? Like, do you like to climb or do those bear animal walks or, what makes your body feel good? And for the most part, they can kind of like some kids hate to be squished and some just want like all the pillows on top of them, so it's just, there's preferences. So I'll figure that out in sessions and then I'll send that home with parents. Like, here's a list, give them options, help them do it, and then
and if parents don't know, what are the possibilities? I mean, you just mentioned a few, but I'm curious if you can expand on that. What kind of a possible inputs kids might desire? Like you mentioned, just so if you can just list them, and then maybe it will generate some ideas in parents' heads.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the goal is understanding like what you're doing with these activities is helpful. So what you're trying to do when you're calming kids is mostly you're trying to give them proprioceptive input. So you're trying to activate the joints and muscles to calm the nervous system. Just like a really tight hug is very calming to all of us, right? And that's what's happening is you're activating your proprioceptive system. Or you've gone to the gym and you have that really nice, relaxed, tired feeling inside. That's also because you've had a lot of proprioceptive input from that weightlifting or whatever you've done. So that's what you're trying to give your kid in a child appropriate way, so the weight bearing activities like walking on your hands and feet like a bear or jumping like a frog where you're squatting all the way down and then jumping up with your hands and your feet back down. Exactly. Or the like the tight hug, but like extreme tight hug. So you're wrapped in a blanket and like really, really tight, like a burrito, really tight, that's an extreme whole body tight hug. So anything that's really like that, or helping, you can load like a laundry basket or a box full of books or heavy toys or something and have them push that around the room, so they're pushing that, pretending that they're pushing the grocery cart or put their little sister inside and push her around in the cart, like things like that. Just activating the muscles to try to get some of that sensory seeking energy out.
I see. Interesting. Okay, so it's like you got to build your Rolodex of activities, the deck of cards, which you can do. But the idea is to provide that, to fulfill that need before you, let's say, want them to come down and sit to eat the dinner, for example.
Yeah, basically feeding that need so that they can be a little bit more calm.
So in your controlled environment, right, I'm assuming you don't have cell phones and iPads laying around. But what about the house? When a lot of modern kids, it seems like it's a magic solution for them, and that's what they really, really want. So how do you navigate the same need? How do you work with kids when they're in a home environment?
Yeah, I mean, the screen thing that's a whole other conversation. But I mean, I would definitely say, like most people do, like try to limit access, maybe only half an hour on the weekends. I mean, I know that's almost impossible, but less is better, and because it's overstimulating in a very different way. It's like stimulating the brain and the eyes, but not the rest of the body. And I would definitely say try to limit screens, and at home just when you come home, you can play with your toys, you can play in the backyard. More movement is better always.
Because I was thinking, It would be incredible if I could just come in, give them a nice tight hug, and then remove the phone, and that would be enough, right? That would be great.
Yeah, it's a whole nother challenge for sure.
Yeah, that's helpful. So you mentioned the swinging. I've heard about the calming effects of that. And I was going to ask you about something else. Does insurance cover sessions with you guys, or it's more out-of-pocket
Um,
expense for our parents?
Yeah, for my clinic, it's out of pocket. I don't take insurance. I do provide super bills that parents can submit to try to get reimbursement. In general, OT can be covered by insurance. It is like a medical service. I always say if you don't have a diagnosis yet, at least get your prescription from your pediatrician for OT. And that you can give that to insurance with my super bill. And sometimes that supports it a little bit better.
And just out of curiosity, if you don't want you to have to mention it, but what does it normally cost to come and see you guys for evaluation and maybe a couple sessions of play? Or maybe you can just speak about your area in general. How much does it cost for parents to come in?
In LA, in Los Angeles, treatment sessions for OT, private OT in general, are about 200 to 2, and assessments range from 500 to 900, maybe 1,000.
Because they have to do a little bit more work. Okay, got it. And every time they come to play and do the activities, that's roughly $200 range
Yeah.
and change. Okay, understood. What about the homework? What do you, I assume they come in, they exercise, play with you guys, and then they go home and you give them some kind of tips and tricks and exercises and homework to do?
Yeah, but it just depends on how much time the families have. For the most part, most of the work is being done in our sessions. And I'll give general strategies. I'll talk to the teachers and give them strategies to support their regulation and activities for home. The parents are learning as we go, and they're starting to understand their child's sensory needs and how to deal, how to notice, like, oh, they're really sensitive. We're at the birthday party and oh, they're starting to get overwhelmed. They can really tell we need to go take a break. Time to sit and have some pizza. Like no more bouncy house right now before it escalates. So I think just the education piece more than homework is what's really effective. Some kids do need like specific motor skills to practice, and we'll do that. Practice dribbling the ball, practice playing catch, practice jumping jacks or whatever it is. I'd say the parent education is the key piece of all that more than the specific homework.
And you mentioned something interesting. If I heard you correctly, you're saying that you will give parents education awareness on how to help their kid. And the key to what you said is before that tantrum, before they explode, right? I assume you teach parents on how to preempt, how to observe that situation and pull the kid and direct them into the right activity so they can normalize themselves.
Right. Parents know their kids and they can read them, but then having that extra knowledge about why are they reacting that way. They know the situations that they're having, and like birthday parties are really hard. They know that. But what specifically about it? Is their child sensitive to sight, visually overwhelming at birthday parties, all the decorations and the kids running around? Or is it the sound, all the kids screaming and hopped up on sugar from the cake and all this? Or is it the movement? The bouncy house was fun, but then I got overwhelmed because I was getting trampled on and there was just like so much going on. What parts of the birthday party are hard, and when do we need to intervene before they're overwhelmed and crying?
And that can be too much of a bouncy house, for example. So
Yeah.
the way you do your approach is you observe and you help parents to identify, like, hey, your kid is prone to react to this kind of stimuli, too many people, for example, right? Or too much of a physical activity. So you're teaching the parent to kind of recognize what the child is responding to, or not responding well, rather. Right. I know that OT in general has some kind of boundaries, rules, and best practices, but what makes you different? What do you guys maybe do a little bit different, or maybe you have your special techniques or approaches? Or what makes you unique?
Yeah, I'd say we do motor skills. Like that is the bread and butter, fine motor skills, gross motor skills.
Mhm.
But I'd say over the years, what I've really started to do is I've learned a variety of strategies and different frameworks from other professions. So, for example, there is a program called social thinking that was developed by a speech and language pathologist. And basically, it's a nice way to teach kids social skills, but also emotional regulation. And our emotions are directly connected with our sensory systems. So the way the brain works is that you have a sensory sensation, and
Hmm.
then you have an emotion or a feeling about it, and then you have a thought. And that's how it goes through our brain. Most of the time it goes like that, and you're like, oh, that's what happened. You're stressed and you're busy, and somebody comes up and taps you on the shoulder and you jump, right? That's a big reaction to being tapped on the shoulder, but because you're so focused or stressed or whatever it is, you first were like, oh my God, I'm under attack, because your body sensed that touch on the shoulder. And then you're like, oh no, it's just Joe coming by to say hi. Like, it's not, there's no bear attacking you, but that was your immediate, was like, oh no, run. Like, so that's kind of how our emotions can get connected to sensory. Because for a kid who is sensitive to, let's say, auditory, they are playing, and then all of a sudden an ambulance goes by outside and they're in tears. They're just like, oh my God, it's too much, I can't handle it. So they're having this huge emotional reaction to a sensory experience that can happen and build up throughout the day. And so you're having these kids have these big reactions if they're sensitive, and can be overwhelmed. And a kid who is can be both sensitive to one sensory system and seeking and needing more of another, all in the same body.
So, what do you teach parents about the state of being overwhelmed? What happens in this particular case? So, the ambulance passed by, and it was so quick, you didn't have time to preemptively do anything about it. So, it already happened. The child is currently overwhelmed. So, what do you do then?
The biggest thing with tantrums or just overwhelm in general, first of all, just stay calm yourself so that the child can feel like the environment around them is calm.
Hmm.
Hold the space. If they enjoy hugs, just sit there quietly. I wouldn't talk that much. And that's to go with any kind of upset. If they're upset because you said no about something, or it's time to go, or whatever it is, any kind of upset, less talking is better, because even when you and I are upset, we're not really hearing that much of what people are saying. We're just angry. So
Hmm.
same with kids, you don't try to reason with them when they're upset. Just hold the space, be calm, know that let them know that they're safe and still loved, even though they're having a tantrum. And then later when they're calm, you can help. If you're going to talk through it, whatever happened, you can talk through it.
There's so many situations that make people, make parents feel embarrassed about themselves when kids start throwing tantrums at the stores.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Laying on the floors, doing all kinds of stuff, crying. And I see parents, they are battling between not being embarrassed in the front of others and caving in to the kids' actions. So I'm just curious. I mean, the holiday season is coming up, and kids are going to the stores. So how do you navigate that situation from your perspective?
Sure. I would say, like before, preempt. No, if your kid is a kid that tantrums sometimes, start to learn like what specifically is triggering him. Is it like, oh, I saw a toy and I want it? Like, if at all possible, go to the store before you pick them up from school or whatever it is. Try to mitigate the situation before these big upsets happen, or plan ahead. You talk to the kid, plan ahead. Like, I know we're going to the store. I know you really want this or that, or if you see something, but you know, at home, once we get home, you can have a popsicle instead or something like that. Just try to preempt as much as possible and make them be able to be successful, set them up for success. If it's a really loud environment, have those little headphones. Or if you know that they're going to have to be sitting in the car for a long time because you're driving to grandma's house or something, let's do a bunch of heavy work and exercises before we get in the car. Things like that. Just try to preempt and set them up for success.
Okay, so interesting. I get the common ideas, right? So let's say you mentioned the car now, yes, and I immediately in my head popped up that scenario when they're being loud and screaming and having too much energy and they cannot sit for even 15 minutes. It's kind of like refilling the bottle, right? So if they have to get that tank full, so let's empty it out before they go into the car, so they have kind of like less energy, right? So literally speaking of burning energy. Okay. So doing heavy work and doing all these things. Okay, interesting. Very interesting. So you mentioned, do you by any chance, do you have a course or an online piece of content that you share with your parents, or you do more on the one-on-one?
I mean, my website has some links to books and websites and things that you can read about. I try to have parents not just Google, because you like Googling anything, you can go down the rabbit hole and be diagnosing your kid with some crazy thing. Doesn't really apply like anything when we Google our own medical concerns. But yeah, the resources on my website are good. And that has some information about sensory processing in general and some nice books about how to raise a child with sensory needs. But yeah, a lot of it is just like one-on-one support with the parents.
And you can mention your website so people can look you up and find more information. So what's the website?
Sure. Yeah. It's Kinder Clinic Inc. Inc.com.
Mm-hmm. And Kinder with a K.
Yeah.
These days, people take the normal word, misspell it, and then
Yeah.
it gets people confused. Is it that kind of C or K or?
KinderClinic.com.
Got it. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to share? Maybe something that you want to tell every parent when they come in, something that you wish they knew, or
Right.
something like that.
I think mostly understanding that we all have sensory systems and sensory needs, and that learning as a parent, what your sensory needs are, your sensory sensitivities, and how you're responding. Like, for example, your kid might be a really loud kid. They're always singing and
Hmm.
talking and
Hmm.
crying, but you personally are auditorily sensitive. So how is that building up in your own sensory system and emotional system? And how is that eventually you're holding it together, but then finally you just can't handle it anymore? And being aware of, oh, I need to step away. I need to give myself a sensory break and go either put my headphones on, listen to calm music, or just take a moment away, or do I need to do more exercise because I'm a sensory seeker? Or what is it, so that you can be more calm and be able to hold that space for your sensory seeker or a sensory sensitive kid. And then also understanding yourself, but then again, understanding your child's specific sensory profile. Are they sensitive to this or that? And what's setting them off? And how can we mitigate that before they're overwhelmed or needing so much more, whatever it is?
Yeah, it is partially what the flight attendants are trying to teach us, right? So put the mask on yourself first so that you
Exactly.
can actually help the other person.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Just really understanding that our sensory systems and how we react to our world is so closely connected to our emotional system and our emotional regulation. And our little kids are feeling and doing all of what we are experiencing as well. And as long as we can be aware of our own sensory and emotional systems, then we can, like you're saying, support them.
And maybe this is a little bit of a question, an uneducated question on my end. But since you mentioned that genetics play a huge role what a kid might have, knowing yourself might help, right? If you are sensory seeking as a parent, let's say, or you get overwhelmed by the loud noise, is that safe to assume that your child may be prone to the same things?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe not specifically exactly the same, but yeah, it may have certain sensory concerns like that. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I understand. All right. I thought horoscope has more to do with a child's behavior than genetics, but thank you very much. So again, the website is kinderclinicinc.com, and you're in Santa Monica and Los Angeles. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, they will be able to get a hold of you through the website. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. It was very educational and informative. And reach out to us if you have any questions or if you need anything from us. So
Okay. Thank
thank
you
you
very
so
much
much.
for having me.
Thank you very much.